Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be going over Frostbite, Apogee, Vinebear. So if you are unfamiliar with the concept of Vinebear, essentially you're a werebear and you summon vines from spriggan form. So you are just hitting enemies with vines. Now, there was a few problems with the old version of Vinebear, mainly due to the nerf to poison. So the old versions of Vinebear would play poison in attunement stacks. So if you don't know, summon vines, they get 4% poison chance per point of attunement you have, and that is a lot of poison chance. Now, poison was nerfed into the ground, of course, recently, so it has left the Vinebear community a little bit lacking per se in terms of single target damage, but thankfully EHG has solved it for us. That is by adding a new item called Apogee of the Frozen Light. I can't remember if it's this patch or last patch, please don't kill me, but essentially Apogee, the idea is it gives you a lot of more minion cold damage. And in this case, we're going to be using it with vines, and we're converting the poison chance that they get innately, and of course, poison chance from other sources like surf and milk, right? We're converting it into frostbite chance and then doing cold damage over time with our vines. Now, one of the differences between my version of Vinebear and Aschere's is I went for only vines. So, for instance, the older versions, they would use thorn totems and vines together, but I found that vines themselves can do most of the work if you scale them properly. So, in this build, we're using melee vines. Why are we using melee vines over range vines? Well, range vines, they use spirit thorns, which are like 40% less chance to apply ailments, but of course, they do it at a range. So in some situations they are better, but they're specifically a lot worse on single target, and their kill time is a lot slower because, they deal 40% less damage than melee vines do as a straight up like thing. But the problem with melee vines was they're clear. You'd put melee vines down and it would feel terrible, right? The enemies would move around out of their area because they have a very small targeting range for how small they are, right? Which is sucks. But there is a way of getting around that, and that's thanks to a few different options available to us. The first is using Warcry Pull. So there's a node that reverses the knockback on Warcry, which pulls enemies into it closer to wherever it's being cast. And of course, we turn it into a totem, which then makes it so that it casts multiple times. We also apply the Entangling Roots buff to it to give it even more cast speed, which means it pulls more and more and more into our viney growths, which makes our melee vines significantly more effective. Now, of course, as you can tell from the footage, a lot of the enemies that I'm trying to kill are frozen. Why is that? Well, that's because of Apogee of the Frozen Light. Apogee of the Frozen Light has a line at the bottom where whenever an enemy dies, you get a stack of frozen. Well, whenever an allied minion dies, you get a stack of frozen vengeance. And whenever you use a melee attack, you lose the stack, but you freeze up to 8 normal enemies near your minions, and you also deal more damage to chilled enemies for your minions. And this is absolutely insane. Freezing almost every single normal enemy, it boosts your survivability significantly, and it makes it so the melee vines are a lot more useful because as they're sitting next to the melee vines and they're not moving, the melee vines can do their job. Now, melee vines have one more thing up their sleeve that give them significantly more single target than range vines ever could possibly achieve, and that is because of the minion melee attack speed idols. So these are 2x2 idols that Primalist has access to, and they give up to 25% increased attack speed for melee minions. This on top of all of the other attack and cast speed we have on our tree and on our skills and everything else. It means our vines are essentially little machine guns as they just literally attack and attack and attack, and we can get easily well over 1,000 stacks of frostbite on a boss, like you can see in the footage from earlier. And that's very satisfying. It's very satisfying to watch your vines kill everything while they're being frozen. Now, one of the biggest problems that I had with this build is for specific enemies like Oribus, right? Oribus's hitbox is a little bit smaller than other enemies. So, like for instance, Sometimes you'll summon vines in a random pattern, and sometimes the vines are just a little bit too far away from Oribus. Thankfully, the build is tanky enough because we're a werebear, of course, and we have enough sustain that we can base tank Oribus while our vines are killing, Oribus. But the problem is, of course, our damage is a little bit like a tinge lower on fighting Oribus. But to be honest, the damage is actually comparable to range vines because, like I said, range vines also don't get your idols, like the attack speed idols specifically, and they also do not get they get nerfed by 40% because they're using the skill that Spriggan uses, the 40% less chance to apply ailments, meaning that even if we have like about maybe let's say 6 vines on an Oribus, that's about comparable to how much range damage 12 vines would be doing. So in theory, technically, we're not losing that much DPS at all, while also maintaining really satisfying clear as we just pull enemies in, we stun them, well, not stun them, we freeze them, we pull them, and we slow them, and we also ensnare them with entangling roots, meaning that they're not doing anything. Enemies usually aren't doing anything. Like bosses and rares are not really that hard to deal with when all the normal monsters are frozen solid, which is wonderful. All of this combined has led to a very satisfying build. The last thing I want to talk about before we go in is the sustain on this build. If you're wondering, Dread, how are you sustaining on this build even though you don't have any like healing, leech, or health regen? Well, that is because of the wonders of Warcry Totem. It turns out when you turn your Warcry into a totem, of course, it'll cast multiple times. Also, that 300 healing per Warcry will apply multiple times. So, for instance, you get healed once, twice, three, and depending on its cast speed. Of course, reducing its cast speed slightly, and also as well, it will scale with minion healing effectiveness. So it can grab minion healing effectiveness from the tree, from idols, and that can get our Warcry totem to heal us significantly. And of course, it's tripled when we're all life, which is really good because we have a lot of things that make it so that whenever we're low life, we have significantly more DR because of Berserker, because of all of our endurance threshold and stuff like that. So Warcry keeps us topped off, and if that's not enough, we actually have a 10% chance to summon a healing totem when we are hit, which is absolutely insane for healing us because guess what? It also scales off of attunement. It scales its healing effectiveness off of attunement. So we're healing for like 400 each time it casts, which then scales with your minion cast speed. And all of that combined leads to you actually being surprisingly tanky, which is very surprising, mind you. So with all that being said, let's go in game and let's talk about the character more. If you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. That's the best way of supporting me. All right, here we are in game with the character. Let's talk about the skills, shall we? So the first skill to be important about is spriggan form here. We take 5 points into overgrowth because we want the more damage, of course. 5 points into creeping underbrush because we want as much attack and cast speed as humanly possible on our vines. 3 points into gardens of rage because it keeps us rage topped off, so we don't have to invest into points of reduced rage decay on the werebear tree. And then, of course, 5 points to the nightshade because we want as much poison chance as possible because we are converting it into frostbite with this node. This node converts it into frostbite and it converts all sources of poison. So this includes the poison from serpent's milk, which is that 200% chance to poison on hit, meaning that we get an absolute insane amount of frostbite chance that is not being reduced damage wise, which is wonderful. Then of course we take whatever points we can. I take this point because it increases the duration of our healing totems whenever we get hit. Ooh, sorry about that. I had to sneeze. Okay, all right. So the next skill here, we're using werebear. This is very specific here, so let's talk about it. 2 points travel into territorial, 2 points into Fury of the Maul so that we can, maul more often, which is our Fury Leap. 5 points to Wild Command. This is a lot of increased damage for free. This essentially means every single time we have minions up, they deal like 200% increased damage because as soon as we summon more, we resummon them. So we only get 200% increased damage from this, but that is a lot of increased damage for free. Then 3 points travel into Bloodthirst, then 1 point into Skull Crusher. So that we can use this, so we can use Fury Leap, which we'll talk about in a second here. Then 3 points travel into Pummel and Bash, and then 1 point into Woodland Bear so that we can cast Entangling Roots, which is important later. War Cry here. Mainly, we care about Totemic Heart, turning it into a totem, getting the reduced cooldown, getting the knockback distance, and we're reversing it so that the totem is constantly pulling enemies into your vines, which is great. We have haste here so that I can get a little bit of haste so I can move around in monoliths faster. 1 point travel into Juggernaut, 3 points of the Breath of Aschere. This is really strong. It's tripled when we're at low life, and it scales off minion healing effectiveness when we have, of course, Totemic Heart set up. And we're also cleansing ailments as well, and we're constantly cleansing ailments when we're inside our totem's area. Then 1 point travel, 2 point travel in these two, then eventually 5 points into Frostclaw for a bunch of increased damage for our things, because we're doing increased cold damage with our, we're doing cold damage essentially. Then 1 point to Breath of Winter, Bringer of Winter, so that we get free chill chance for everything involved. So everything is always chilled, so we always get the more damage from our Apogee very easily. Then, of course, Fear Leap here, very specific nodes that matter. We grab one node into Gravity because we want to pull enemies into our vines, of course. Then 4 points into Rise and 4 points into Poison Thicket. That means that we summon 6 vines every single time we cast our Maul. A good tip is if you hold your cursor right next to your werebear, you move less, which means the spread on your vines are significantly less so that you don't have to worry about your vines spreading out too much, because if you maul too far, they'll be at the departure and the landing, but if you kind of do it like this, they'll be much closer and much more grouped up for a single target. That was a nice little tip that I learned specifically. Then we grab the Frenzy. This is free 20% attack and cast speed for our minions, of course. Then 3 points to Wings of Endurance to give me a little bit more healing whenever we're in the Monolith of Fate and stuff, because I need a little bit more healing. Then, of course, let's talk about Entangling Roots. Entangling Roots only has a very few specific nodes that matter. First things off, Overgrown Garden for circle mode, so that it always applies in a circle whenever we use Entangling Roots. Then we grab Frenzying Thorns for a bunch of increased attack and cast speed for our vines and our totems. Our War Cry counts as a totem, so this actually makes our War Cry totem cast its thing more and heal us more, which is really strong. And then, of course, we grab the ally poison chance, because guess what? That is a lot of frostbite chance for our minions, which is wonderful. That's pretty much it for skills. Let's talk about important passives. So important passives, of course, grabbing as much attunement as possible, grabbing Berserker for the 25% less damage taken in low life, Beastmaster, all the aspect of the boar stuff. That's one of the benefits of being a werebear versus a spriggan, is we get access to aspect of the boar, which is a massive 30% less damage taken. And then Druid here, we just grab as much attunement as we can possibly can. We're grabbing 5 points travel into River Spirit, so we get the 40% frostbite chance. Very, very strong. 5 points into Totemic Restoration for not only increased minion healing, which applies to our Warcry totem, it also applies to the healing totems popped out from the 5 point bonus here. This is actually insane. When I'm in the monoliths and I get hit a billion times in a row, this is really strong, and it keeps us alive in monoliths, which is great. On single target, our Warcry totem does fine, but for clear, this is amazing for us. Of course, 8 points of Harmonious Wisdom, so we can get a bunch of crit avoid. Then, cold penetration for our minions, of course. Attack and cast speed for our minions as well. And of course, 10 points in the hide skin, so we get a bunch of HP, which of course makes us very tanky. And that's pretty much it for passives. For the rest of the passives, I would heavily suggest filling out Berserker, then grabbing, where is it? In Beastmaster here, grabbing this attack and cast speed for minions. This will actually also apply to the cast speed from our Warcry totem, which would make it cast faster, which means we get more pulls and more heals, which is wonderful. I just didn't grab it because I'm level 92, and I also have a few passive points missing, as always, because I'm too lazy to finish the campaign. Now, let's talk about blessings here. Void Res. I didn't get a good Void Res roll, but eventually cap out your entire Void Res with this. Lightning Res here. I'm only running Health Regen, mainly because I'm going to be playing a different build that's using Health Regen, so I want to keep this for now. Necrotic Res here, we actually cap our Crit Avoid on our gear, so we can actually just go for either all resistance, or we can go for Necrotic Resistance. Either one works and is fine. Here, armor eventually. I need to get the improved armor eventually. Then, of course, the Age of Winter for the increased armor. That's pretty much it for those. Now let's talk about idols. For idols, you mainly want the minion attack speed idols. You want as much minion attack speed as humanly possible. You don't really care about what the prefix is. You just want all of this minion attack speed, because it is a gigantic amount of damage. Now let's talk about for gears. So for mandatory uniques, There's nothing like technically mandatory. This is like 40% more damage, so of course we really want it. And this gives us a lot of extra damage as well. Serpent's Milk, you don't need LP on it, but it's very easy to get LP on it, and it just gives us a lot of damage. But if you want a smooth time, I would heavily suggest having an Apogee and a Serpent's Milk ahead of time. But you can technically just play it as poison and then convert to Frostbite when you get access Vinebear, and then swap into Apogees and Serpent's Milk when you get them. And of course, we're running Silver Fronds here. LP Silver Fronds would be your best in slot. I don't have a Silver Frond here, but eventually you'd want two LP Silver Fronds in the end game. And like get some HP, some attunement on them. That'd be great. I'm using Hands of Judgment here. That's because Hands of Judgment can scale really hard for a build because, as you can tell, it gets a lot of attunement and also has a really low level requirement, meaning that we can get a lot of extra attunement. If you get like exalted attunement, this can give you like 30, 40 attunement, and that is a lot of poison chance for our for our vines, which is wonderful. And eventually, like I said, it's very easy to get LP on these. It's on a good base, so overall, very good pair of gloves. Then for let's talk about the rares and stuff. So helmet here, increased attack and cast speed for vines, attunement, health, crit avoid. This was perfect. Other than the base, this was perfect. Eventually, you'd want it on the ancestral helmet base for the increased life. For the chest here, exalted attunement. Eventually, you'd want minion cold damage on that prefix or vitality, then HP, but it's on a good base. Our shield here, you can technically dual to Apogees and deal 20% more damage, but I found using a shield is significantly better because not dying is wonderful. This is pretty much all you'd want on a shield. You could go for all res instead of fire res, but it doesn't really matter. Ring here, like I said, we go for double Silver Frond, but right now I'm using one with attunement and exalted minion damage. Belt here, minion damage, minion health. Right now I'm at 82 attunement, by the way, and we're at 468% minion health. That felt pretty good for the minions, but I could tell if you go higher corruption, you might need a little bit more minion health. So like for instance, like minion health on the prefix of your chest or something would probably go a long way. Gloves here, like I said, eventually you'd want attunement. Boots here, stereotypical boots, just trying to go as fast as possible while also being tanky. Eventually you'd want attunement on that prefix instead of vitality though. And then for the relic here, exalted attunement, some HP, res, and eventually minion health or minion damage on a better base with the necrotic res. And that's pretty much it for the gear. And that's pretty much it for the character. If you haven't already, I heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way of supporting me. With all that being said, I'm off to go work on something else. Bye.